This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cora product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting inside of your vagina. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora today, and you'll receive your first month's supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 149. Welcome to the 149th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. Today, I'm excited to bring to you a special solo episode on a topic that I've been dying to talk about on the show. And so today we're going to be talking about Ovulation Predictor Kit. So I'm really excited to share that with you. It's something that it comes up all the time with my clients in my Facebook group, just all over the internet, in any fertility awareness forum. For those of you who are in the forums, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a hot topic, and so I'm really excited to dig into it today. There's a couple of things I want to share with you. One is that enrollment is now open for the next iteration of the Fertility Friday group program. So I'm really, really excited about that. The Fertility Awareness Mastery 10-week program is accepting applications. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and make sure to apply to be part of the program as soon as you can. I can only accept a limited number of women in the program, so I just want to make sure that you get your application in there if you're wanting to be part of the group. And the group is going to be starting towards the end of August, beginning of September. So we're going to be starting within the next month or so. So I'm really excited to have you in there. And before we jump into today's episode, I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Cora tampons. The more I learn about menstrual products and what they're made from and where they're sourced, the more that I feel frustrated that most companies and corporations are not more concerned about this. Your vagina is in some ways a lot like your mouth in that it's very absorbent and it's obviously internal. And so we really have to be mindful about what we put in there, because it's kind of like if you wouldn't put it in your mouth, you probably shouldn't put it in your vagina. And so the thought of all of the chemicals and pesticides and how they could be disrupting our hormones and our endocrine system without us even knowing about it or contributing to painful periods and things of that nature, it's really incredible. And so I really appreciate Cora for the care that they take to make sure that the products that they make are made with 100% organic cotton, no pesticides, no toxins, no synthetic materials. And really, when you're using a product that is natural and free from all of these chemicals and toxins, then you're setting yourself up to have a healthier menstrual cycle, a healthier hormone balance. And a number of clients who have been, busily switching the products that they're using have already noticed a difference in terms of their pain with periods. I've had a number of clients tell me that ever since switching their products, and among other changes that they've been making, so it could be a combination, but their pain and their symptoms, negative symptoms associated with their periods have really gone down. So I think it's really important to have these conversations so that we're very much aware of what we're putting in our body. And, maybe one day it'll be standard that no menstrual products are using chemicals and pesticides and toxins. But until then, it's really up to us to find products that are free from these toxins so that we can really keep our hormonal health in check and ensure that we're having as healthy of menstrual cycles as possible. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora and check out Cora's products. And when you sign up with Cora, you actually get your first month's supply free of charge. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. Now let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I decided to come to you with a solo episode. This is something that I'm really excited to talk to you about today. It's something that comes up in every group program that I host. So I've been hosting a number of group programs, as you know. I just finished my last iteration of group programs at the end of June, and it was a really incredible experience. I just feel so blessed to be able to connect with members of the Fertility Friday community in such an intimate way and to really get to know everybody. It's surprising after such a short time in some ways that you can really get a sense of the women that I'm working with. So it's really just an honor to be able to create this space for women to come together and be able to really learn and deepen their understanding of their menstrual cycles. But with that said, there's a certain topic that always comes up. It comes up in the Facebook group. It comes up in all the fertility awareness forums. I get questions all the time about it. And so today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about ovulation predictor kits. And I'm going to share with you my take on them. And, my take has shifted a bit over the years. So as I work with more clients who are using them in different ways, this has shaped my view on them as well. And of course, coming from a fertility awareness educator perspective, I definitely look at them differently than, most people would look at them. So there's a number of topics I want to jump in with you today. And so basically, I just want to share with you some of the most common pitfalls when using ovulation predictor kits that I see. And these are pitfalls that can actually lower your chances of conception, which seems really counterintuitive. Like the purpose of using an ovulation predictor kit is obviously to predict ovulation and then time sex as closely to ovulation as possible. So you might be wondering, well, how is it possible that using an ovulation predictor kit could actually lower your chances of conceiving? And so there's a number of things that I've seen and a number of different considerations I think are really, really important. And ultimately, my foundational belief going into this conversation is that when you're charting your cycles with the fertility awareness method, and when you have a really good understanding of what's happening in your body, and you have a really clear understanding of your cervical mucus patterns, you know how to interpret them, and you know what all of that means. So when you see stuff, you know what it means. When you have a really good understanding of how to confirm ovulation with your temperature, and when you have a really good understanding of what a healthy menstrual cycle looks like, then all of those things are really going to set you up for timing sex accurately. And that, in my opinion, should come first, and then ovulation predictor kit second. And so I'll talk about why I think it's far more important to have a really deep and clear understanding of your cycle than it is to rely heavily on ovulation predictor kits. Because the way that I have always felt about it as a woman coming from the perspective, so I've been charting my own cycles for over 15 years, with that in mind, in some ways, I don't see the purpose of it. So in some ways, I think that there's no point. And we'll talk about why that is. But in other situations, I have seen and I do see how it can be beneficial. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So the very first point that I want to talk about is essentially the crux, like the real big challenge for me about ovulation predictor kits. From the way I have seen it applied with my clients who use them, for the most part, is that ovulation predictor kits encourage women to use rhythm method thinking. And so it's enforced if you're working closely with a practitioner who has suggested for you to use them and who has talked to you about how to use them. So part of the way that it enforces rhythm method thinking is the idea that, okay, so I'm going to use the strips, and between this day and this day, I'm going to pee on the strips, and that's going to tell me when I ovulate. So even what I mean by rhythm method thinking, so I guess I can back up a little bit and talk about what I mean by that. Rhythm method thinking, what that means is really getting into this idea that my cycles are basically the same every month, and all I need to do is figure out when I ovulate. And then once I figure out when I ovulate, I'll pretty much know when I ovulate every month, and I can just time sex around that time. So this is when you start getting into the conversation of, I typically ovulate on day 15. And so I'm going to have sex around day 15 every month because that's when I ovulate. And so I have seen that type of thinking lower the chances of conception in my clients. And because they're taking actions based on this idea of when they're supposed to ovulate, and they're because they've assumed that that's what's going to happen, they take that assumption and they pay closer attention to that than what's actually happening in their bodies. So I've seen women fully dismiss their actual physical signs of ovulation because of this belief that ovulation is going to happen on a certain day. And so I see it in the charts in a number of different ways. So one of the ways that I'll see it in the chart is I'll see sex happen up until a certain day, and then the sex will stop. Or I'll see kind of the observational routine happen to a point. For example, around ovulation, you would expect to see several days of mucus. And so based on that assumption, I've seen it where a client, and I've seen this several times, so it's not just one client, but I've seen this where a client will have mucus leading up to ovulation, but then they don't actually ovulate. And then, so there's then a couple of days of dry, but they assume they ovulate because of the day of the month. and the temperatures are not lining up, which would indicate that you didn't ovulate, but they kind of dismiss that because, but it's day 15. I always ovulate on day 15. And then they actually then have mucus again. So the mucus comes back, indicating that their body's trying to ovulate again. But because they have already decided in their mind that ovulation usually happens on a certain day, they completely dismiss the mucus observations, don't have sex because they already had sex because they assumed that they ovulated on day 15. And then what happens is it can cause them to miss their fertile window because the fertile window actually wasn't before, because for whatever reason, your body didn't ovulate that time. And so now when you're seeing mucus again in this, example that I'm giving you that I've seen a number of times, they completely dismiss it in their minds because they thought they ovulated already. So the reason why that's important is because the whole purpose of the fertility awareness method was never to get you to the point that you could predict when you're going to ovulate. And because we were all trained with this idea that our cycles are always the same every month and that, it's going to fall on a calendar and you can just predict everything, even though we try to use fertility awareness and we try to understand what it means, we still fall back into the rhythm method because it's comfortable. It gives us comfort. It's that thought of, I totally understand my body. And in your mind, that means I can totally predict what's going to happen. So I think with Ovulation Predictor kits, they encourage you to think that way, because in order to use them, you basically have to start using them based on a certain date, right? And then you kind of use them around this period of this window, waiting for the positive to happen. And if the positive doesn't happen around that window, it can be frustrating and all these things can happen. But ultimately, it encourages you to really think about it in terms of what day of the cycle. What day of the cycle should I start peeing on the strip? What day of the cycle does my ovulation fall on? And so for those of you who are listening and thinking, well, that's nice, but I always ovulate on this day. What I can say is that over the years, seeing thousands of charts, seeing 15 years of my own, I can say that even for women that are super regular, where their periods and their ovulation typically does happen in a similar way, cycle to cycle, it doesn't always happen on the same day. And your body is just as susceptible as anyone else's body to the changes that, for instance, travel and stress can bring and different things. And so I've seen it so consistently that that really and truly, in order to maximize your chances of conception, you really want to throw the date part of the equation out of the window. Like you want to literally take this whole concept of like I ovulate on this date and throw it out of the window entirely. And so there's a couple of reasons why you want to do that. One of the reasons is because in order to optimize your chances of conception, you're not going to try to have sex on ovulation day, because that's not going to optimize your chances. Believe it or not, having sex on ovulation day and only on ovulation day is not the best strategy for optimizing your chances of conception. In order to optimize your chances of conception, you have to pay really close attention to your mucus observations and time sex in line with when you actually have mucus present. So this brings me to another really, really important point about ovulation predictor kits, which is that ovulation predictor kits encourage women to ignore what's happening in their bodies. It really sets up this dynamic where this technology that is external from myself is more accurate of a measure than what's actually literally physically happening in my body. And so let's talk for a second about how ovulation predictors kits work and what exactly it is that they're measuring. So ovulation predictor kits are measuring a hormone. They're measuring your levels of luteinizing hormone. So they're looking for an LH surge. An LH surge is not ovulation, but the way that the hormonal cycle goes, as your estrogen levels rise, as you're reaching close to ovulation, as your eggs and the follicles in your ovaries are developing, producing all this estrogen, eventually your estrogen gets to the point where it triggers. So it sends a message to your brain, and then your pituitary releases luteinizing hormone, and that is what triggers ovulation. So luteinizing hormone is released before ovulation, and that is what triggers ovulation. The whole purpose of the kit is to test for that LH surge. But with that being said, there are times when that is not reliable. So for women that have PCOS, for example, PCOS, one of the characteristics of it is an elevated LH. So for women who have PCOS, oftentimes they're getting positives that don't mean anything because their LH is high. And in cases of a double peak where your body is approaching ovulation, but for whatever reason backs off, perhaps because of stress or something else, you may actually have an LH surge that does not result in ovulation necessarily. And so what happens is that you completely ignore your body, or you at least are set up that way to completely ignore what's happening in your body and to really believe that the kit itself is going to tell you more than what your own body can tell you. And so from my experience, that's a really big problem. Ultimately, it's your body signs first and ovulation predictor kit second, because there is nothing more concrete than the cervical mucus coming out of your vagina. Like that is actually the most concrete measure of your fertility, because cervical mucus is in line with your hormones. In fact, you could actually take a look at a woman's chart, especially if you're using a charting system that's very detailed and organized, such that you're recording what you're seeing, how much you're seeing, what color, how much it stretches, how many times you're seeing it. You could actually take that detailed look at your mucus and you could put it up beside a chart of your hormones and they would match because your mucus is a really clear reflection on what's happening hormonally in your body. So with that being said, if your body is doing something weird that month, for instance, if there's some sort of stress or something that delays ovulation, the Ovulation Predictor Kit can't give you that complex information. It can tell you that you have an LH surge, but it can't confirm that ovulation actually did happen. Your body, you'd have to look at your body signs for that. You could pay attention to your basal body temperature. You could pay attention to your mucus. And so Ovulation Predictor Kits then set you up for a situation where you no longer pay attention to your mucus and you're just paying attention to this external marker. And so you might think, well, at least it's going to help me time sex with ovulation. And obviously there are countless thousands of women who, with just the Ovulation Predictor Kit, have been able to time sex for conception and conceive. So I'm not saying that there's no point for anybody or that they're not helpful. But what I'm saying is that your body is actually a better measure of what's going to happen. And from my perspective, I see when it can set you up to miss your window, essentially. And so that is why I see it as a problem. Because if, for example, if you get a positive on your Ovulation Predictor Kit and then potentially your ovulation is delayed for some reason, then you're not testing anymore because you already got the positives. So you had sex on those days, and then you figure that you did the job and you're good for that month, and you're no longer paying attention to what your body's doing. And it's possible, because I've seen it a number of times, that then you could have mucus a couple of days later, and then you miss that because you just weren't paying any attention to your body at all. So the next point that I want to talk about is the other side of Ovulation Predictor Kits, which I feel is I feel like it's a really big deal. So as I mentioned, Ovulation Predictor Kits test for the luteinizing hormone surge. And so the way that your body works is, once your estrogen levels rise to a certain point, that's what triggers your brain to release luteinizing hormone and trigger ovulation. And so that typically happens about 24 to 48 hours before ovulation. So about 1 to 2 days before ovulation. So when the Ovulation Predictor Kit is like bang on and it's, predicting ovulation, there's no disturbances and, you just get the LH surge and it means you're going to ovulate. If you're waiting to have sex, you're waiting until that positive. Then the thing about your body is that before the LH surge, it means your estrogen had to be high for a couple days to trigger it. And when your estrogen is high, that's when you have cervical mucus. So by waiting for the LH surge, you're missing out on several days of peak quality mucus that are super fertile and that actually are the best time to try for a baby. Because the way Mother Nature intended it is that sperm live in your body for 3 to 5 days. And so you don't need to have sex on ovulation day in order to get pregnant. You need to have sex in your fertile window because Mother Nature keeps sperm alive in your cervical fluid and in your cervical crypts for several days before ovulation. The whole point of this whole setup is to extend the fertile window so that by the time your body is ready to release that egg, there's already sperm there and available and waiting to fertilize the egg. And so this is huge. I see it all the time. If you are waiting to have sex until you see that positive and you are completely ignoring your mucus and not paying attention to it and just putting all of your energy and faith into this predictor kit, then you are literally missing out on several fertile days each month. And you don't have 1,000 fertile days each month. You only have about 5 to 7, maybe max. So it's really, really important for you to pay attention to your mucus first and ovulation predictor kit second. If I wanted to optimize my chances of conceiving, I absolutely am not going to be waiting until an ovulation predictor kit tells me to have sex, because I've been charting my cycle for 15 years and I know I typically have several days of mucus before I ovulate. So I would be missing out on several days of peak quality, best time to have sex mucus. So it doesn't mean that I don't want to have sex on the day after the positive smiley. That's also a good day. That's also a good day to have sex when you're trying to conceive. But you don't want to miss out on those other days. You know, one thing that I'll mention here is that in all the work that I've been doing with clients, as you know, on the podcast, I talk about sperm a lot. And so I've seen a lot of semen analysis by this point. And you want to really optimize your chances. You want to really make sure that you're utilizing those fertile days, because there's really only let's say, 5 days that matter when you're trying to conceive. And for some women who have fewer days of mucus, maybe there's less. And even if you have a ton more mucus than that, sperm really only live for that kind of 3 to 5 day window. So there's literally 5 days that matter. And so if you're only having sex on one of them or 2 of them before ovulation, that is not optimizing your chances. That's actually minimizing your chances. And I've seen that happen when you're focusing so much on the ovulation predictor kit that you're literally having sex on 2 days. And that's not the way to optimize it. In cases where your partner may have less than optimal semen, less than optimal sperm, you want to make sure that you're really optimizing those days. So another really important point that I wanted to mention is that ovulation predictor kits, they don't help you to understand your cycle better. So I feel like what they're doing is really simplifying what's happening. And by doing that, they're not giving you the opportunity to really look deeper into this issue and really take control of the situation. So by reducing what's happening in your body to just trying to have sex the day before you ovulate, that makes it seem so simple. And it encourages you, like I mentioned, not to pay attention to the signs that are happening in your body. And so essentially there could be some really big things going on, some really big challenges that if you were actually paying attention to your menstrual cycle, you were actually charting your cycle, you were paying attention to, the quality of your period, your pre-ovulatory phase, your follicular phase, what it looks like, what your cervical mucus patterns are, what your luteal phase looks like. So there's so many different things that you could be focusing on that would actually make a really big difference. There's so many different things that you can pick up on a chart. And so whenever I work with clients, there are always specific things that show up on their charts, and we really get in there and work together to figure out if it's a problem, like what the root cause could be, what you can do to really address it and improve those parameters. And so when you're looking at your menstrual cycle as a whole and you're really having an understanding of what's going on, that improves your chances of conception, because if there's a really big glaring issue and you can identify it, then that gives you the ability to actually go in and fix it. And the reason that you're not getting pregnant, it's not necessarily so simple as, okay, I just have to have sex on the day before ovulation. It could really be something different. And if you're not paying attention to your menstrual cycle and really trying to get a sense of what's happening there, then that could make all the difference in the world. So I'd say one of my biggest issues with it as well is that it doesn't help you to understand your cycle better. It really reduces it down to okay, have sex on this day and then everything will be fine. But there could be broader issues going on, and all the while you're kind of focused on this external device. I think that also for women, that in that same vein of doesn't help you to understand what's happening in your body, I think it's really interesting when I hear women talk about using these kits and saying, okay, well, I start peeing on the sticks on day 8 of my cycle. And I always find that is kind of this random date thing that kind of goes along with one of the first points, which is the rhythm method thinking. I often wonder, well, why don't you just start using it when you start to see mucus? because you're not going to see an LH surge before you have several days of mucus. So, I mean, I feel like fertility awareness can inform the use of them, but at the same time, they can also make it so that you don't need them. Ovulation predictor kits aren't necessarily inexpensive, and they're something that you have to kind of continue using, several times, and especially for women that have longer follicular phases. That's like many, many days you could be having, or if you have an irregular cycle, that's a lot of days of checking. And in my opinion, I may as well just be charting and paying attention to my mucus cycles. So ultimately, those are my biggest points. So I'll just quickly summarize. Ovulation predictor kits encourage you to use rhythm method thinking. So I encourage you to think that you're going to ovulate on a specific day, and you should start testing on a specific day. And they also encourage you to think that you should be trying to have sex on ovulation day to conceive, which is a myth, because that's not the way to optimize your chances. They encourage you to ignore what's happening in your body, because then you become reliant on this external device. So you get to the point where you think that this device actually is going to tell you more information than the information you could derive from your own body. When you're strictly using ovulation predictor kits, I've seen it happen a number of times. They can cause you to miss out on a number of your true fertile days. Because as we mentioned, the ovulation predictor kit doesn't turn positive until a day or two before ovulation. And by then, you've already had several days of peak quality mucus in a healthy cycle that you are missing out on entirely if you're waiting to have sex until this thing turns positive. Ovulation predictor kits don't confirm ovulation. So they're measuring for a sign that typically happens before ovulation, but it is not perfect. That's another situation that I've seen a number of times where you get a positive, but it does not guarantee that you're going to ovulate 100% of the time. If you had 1,000 women lined up and they all had little smileys, that 1,000 women wouldn't ovulate. So there's a percentage of women who, even if they have the positive smiley, do not ovulate at that exact time. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. So because they don't confirm ovulation, if you're not paying attention to your body, you can miss your fertile window. And another important point there, ovulation predictor kits don't help you to understand your cycle better. So they detach you from what's happening in your body, and there could be something that's really going on with your menstrual cycle. And if you're not paying attention to it, you're going to miss that. I guess that's the summary of my thoughts about ovulation predictor kits. Obviously, there's a lot more I could go into. I could talk about how to use them, but I feel like the women who use them have a pretty good sense of what their pattern is, what their habit is in terms of how they're going to use it. I think the big, broader takeaway is that, ovulation predictor kits aren't good or bad. I think that there's a lot of women who benefit from them. And for a lot of women, this is kind of the first step into fertility awareness, that first realization, understanding that ovulation doesn't happen all the time and that we're not fertile all the time. And there's really only a small window. So I feel like it's a really good opener into this understanding of how your body really does work, and really getting the sense that there is only a short window of time in every cycle where it's possible for you to conceive. And so if you're able to identify it in one way or another, you are improving your chances of conception. I feel that there are shortcomings, though. It's not inherently because of the ovulation predictor kit as on its own. It's really because of the way that we think about it and the way that we apply it. What fertility awareness charting adds to the equation is that increased understanding of what actually has to happen for me to conceive, for you to have a really clear and detailed understanding of the very important role that your cervical mucus plays in the equation, because it's so important to have that understanding that cervical mucus is what allows sperm to survive, and you need cervical mucus to get pregnant. So if you are completely ignoring the fact that you have mucus on a couple of days because you're waiting for the ovulation predictor kit to turn smiley or turn positive, then you're totally missing the point. And I've seen it so many times. And so that is why I feel quite strongly that your body signs should come first, and then the ovulation predictor kit second. And then it's like this glorious union, like you're paying attention to your fertile days, you're having sex when you have mucus, and you can use this additional tool to really kind of get that little bit of extra information about when ovulation is more likely to happen. And that can help to inform some of your choices. So I feel like if you add it in, it can provide you with some extra information. But if you use it just on its own and you ignore the wealth of information that your body gives you about your fertility, then you're hindering yourself when you actually think you're helping yourself. you're minimizing your chances by only having sex on one of those days or two of those days instead of really utilizing that whole fertile window. So many of my clients find that after they really get a sense of their mucus and they get a really good sense of their fertile window, that they don't really feel the need to have the ovulation predictor kit anymore. I think for a lot of women, without that understanding of what's happening in their cycle, it really feels like they're just shooting in the dark and they have no idea which day is even close to ovulation. The ovulation predictor kit gives them at least, it's like throwing up a white flag. Like at least you have some sort of idea when this event is occurring. But I feel like fertility awareness allows you to take that to the next level because then you really have a clear day-to-day guide. So my mentor, Rosie Chuck, she uses this great analogy, and she uses that whole idea of the rhythm method thinking and thinking about, well, I usually ovulate on this day and it usually happens around this time. She has said before that is what she would call a weather forecast. So it's literally like when you turn on the TV or pull out your phone and you pull up the weather app and then it's telling you what the forecast is for the week. Well, we all know that even though the weather forecast for like a week from now could be sunny, that day could come and it could be raining. So thinking in terms of the rhythm method and using the ovulation predictor kit based on what happened last cycle and really kind of detaching ourselves from what's going on is very, very similar to either looking at the weather forecast and just wearing clothes based on what the forecast said last week, as opposed to actually like looking out your window or going outside. Because you can look to the forecast to see whether it's raining or not, next week, or you can just walk outside next week and you will know whether it's raining or not. And so in that way, fertility awareness charting is the walking outside, because it doesn't really matter. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter what that ovulation predictor kit says when you could literally go outside and see if it's raining or not. So then obviously the analogy is it doesn't matter what the ovulation predictor kit says because you can actually just check for your cervical mucus and see if you have any or not. And if you have cervical mucus, it means you're fertile. And if you don't, it means you're not. It's very straightforward. And so that predictor kit can say negative, it can say positive, it can say whatever it wants. But ultimately, what is actually the most reliable sign is whether or not you have mucus present that day. And then the ovulation predictor kit can help you to, figure out closer to when ovulation is going to happen, but you want to make sure that you're not missing out on those key fertile days. All right. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. That's pretty much all I have to say about ovulation predictor kits. I would love to hear if you have other questions about them. I'm sure that you do. If you want to join us in the Fertility Friday community, I will start a thread in there when I release this episode and we can talk about ovulation predictor kits. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your experiences have been with them. I want to hear how you use them. I want to hear if you're like, Lisa, you're so wrong. I totally get my mucus, but I just like having the ovulation predictor kit to really tell me when I'm close to ovulation because I like to know. So I want to hear all of your perspectives because, of course, I'm sharing my perspective as a fertility awareness educator. So I have my perspective and I'm sure that you have yours based on your experience. And I know that for a lot of women, the ovulation predictor kits provide a wealth of information. So I think one thing to end with is that I have supported several of my clients use the ovulation predictor kits in conjunction with their mucus to conceive. So I am not like anti ovulation predictor kit. I just like to add the information. So if you're an information gal like I am, kind of like a science geek, I believe that it's helpful to have all of the information. So I want to know what's happening with your mucus, and we can certainly use the ovulation predictor kit if you feel particularly attached to it to help to give us that additional information as to the LH surge. If you want to chat more about this topic, make sure to jump into the Fertility Friday Facebook community, which you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/community. So you can head over there, jump in to the Facebook community, and we will talk more about ovulation predictor kits because it's a really hot topic, and I'm really excited to see what everyone has to say about it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/149. For those of you who have been charting your cycles for a while, or even if you have never charted your cycles before, I know some of you listening are on hormonal birth control and thinking about making that leap, thinking about, should I go off of it? Should I not? Maybe you're afraid that you'll get pregnant right away. I know I've had a lot of women in my group programs who come into the program because they really want to make sure that they're doing it right. That's what they'll say. They'll say, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. I don't want to get pregnant right now, but I don't want to be on the pill anymore. And so I really want to make sure that I know what I'm doing so that I can use this method accurately. And so if that's where you're at, or whether you're trying to conceive and you really want to be clear on identifying those days, identifying your fertile window, or your mucus is confusing you, whatever the case is, I want to invite you to be part of my next group program. I'm really excited about it. It's starting towards the end of August, beginning of September. And I have to say, I always attract the nicest, sweetest women to me. It's really incredible to have the honor, really, of assembling these groups and putting together such wonderful groups of women who are somewhere on the same journey. Some of the women who come in the groups have some charting experience. So they've been charting for quite a while on their own, but they really just want the tweaks. They want to know. It's kind of like the last stage of going from feeling kind of iffy all the time to feeling really confident, to knowing exactly what's going on every day, really getting the mucus down, really getting the temperature, the cervical position, and just being really, really clear on what the rules are and exactly what to do if you're wanting to avoid pregnancy. And I find my conception ladies, they really want insight into what's happening in their cycles. They come to me because there's certain things that have been going on in their cycles, and although they've been charting, they can see that it doesn't really line up to what the charts that they see in the book. And so not only do they want to get really confident and clear about their observations, but they also want some insight into what's happening in their cycles. And I find so often that my clients will tell me, well, I went to the doctor and I asked if it was a problem that I've been spotting before every period that I have. And the doctor's like, yeah, that's totally fine. Or, I've been having this issue where my periods are super light. And I went to my doctor and I said, is this a problem? My periods are really light. And my doctor was like, yeah, it's totally fine. So I find that with my clients too, they're really sick of being told everything's fine when their intuition is telling them that it's not fine. And based on their chart, it's clear that it's not fine. So I welcome all of you to come in and join the program, because it's a really unique opportunity to jump in and focus on these things for a period of time. And all of the women who are part of the program really leave with a much better understanding of what's happening in their cycles, a ton of confidence charting, really getting clear on how to use the method, whether they're using it actively for birth control or not right now. And because a lot of the women in my conception group, obviously wanting to conceive, whether it's now or in the future, they also want to be able to have a non-hormonal method that they can rely on in the postpartum. So all of those are awesome reasons for you to jump in and join the program. If you're resonating with that, I would love to have you. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and throw in your application as soon as you can. I want to make sure that we have a spot for you, so don't wait too long to apply. So I want to thank you again for listening, for supporting the show. I do this podcast for you because now I know you're out there listening each week to the podcast. I really appreciate all of you for sharing the show with your friends, talking about it. You're really helping me to grow the show, to share this message with women, this very important message that your menstrual cycle matters. It's really important, and it's actually a mirror to your health. It's a key, it's central, it's the fifth vital sign of your health. The more that I do this work, the more that is reinforced day in and day out, because you would just be amazed to see how much the menstrual cycle reflects what's happening in our lives. So I love that you're helping me share this with women, because really and truly, I have not met a woman, or I have not worked with a client who hasn't said to me, why doesn't everyone know this? I can't believe it. I need to tell everyone I know. So thank you for helping me to do that. I really appreciate you. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.